Welcome, everyone. This is the 5th installment of our Eat, Drink, Vote series. I'm Liz Moran-Stelk. I serve as the Executive Director of the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, and I'll be your host today. This is the 6th of 9 weekly web discussions we're happening each Tuesday at noon from now until Election Day on Tuesday, November 3rd. As many of you know, we are an alliance of farmers and eaters who use our voices and our choices to build a more just and regenerative local food system. And voting is one of the most important ways you can use your voice. To help you cast an informed choice on November 3rd, we solicited input from our members at our annual meetings in February, interviewed our leaders, and worked with local and national partners to create the Illinois Food and Farm Candidate Questionnaire, with 9 of the most pressing issues facing farmers and eaters across Illinois. We sent that candidate questionnaire to all 50 candidates running for U.S. House and Senate in Illinois. We're putting the final touches on the voter guide webpage right now. We know you're eager to hear candidates' responses before you vote. You can sign up to be the first to know when it's ready. Visit ilstewards.org/IWantAnswers and scroll to the bottom. There's a form that says get notified and sign up now. We'll put the link in the chat for you. You deserve to know where your candidates stand on these issues, so please take a look at the Food and Farm Voter Guide before Election Day on November 3rd. Before we begin, though, I'd like to recognize the original caretakers of this land. Given the many geographies you're listening in from today, I ask you to open the native land map that we'll link to in the chat. Please find your location and the communities that once cared for the unceded land on which you reside today. I ask you to critically think about this for a moment. This map is not perfect. It's eternally incomplete and may leave out or misrepresent Indigenous people and the intricacies of their territory. Also, this is just a moment, an acknowledgement. It does not absolve us from years of complicitness, and it does not rebuild the lives of Indigenous peoples. These lands that we live and work on were the ancestral homes of Indigenous people that were forcibly removed, executed, and robbed of their traditions. And yet, even when faced with the most unthinkable circumstances, they are here and thriving. I ask you to join me in taking a moment to consider the ways that you can take action in your community to support Indigenous people. Thank you. Let's get started. So we asked congressional candidates in the voter guide, do you believe accelerating consolidation in the farm input and food processing industry is a problem? And what will you support to ensure a level playing field for farmers? At the Alliance, we're just beginning to understand the impact that consolidation has on all of us. So we're looking to some experts to help us better understand how consolidation impacts food and farming, why it matters, and what can be done to create a more level playing field. Let me introduce Greg Gunthorp of Gunthorp Farms in Northeast Indiana, who serves Chicago area chefs and restaurants. Hi, Greg. Thanks for being here today. And also joining us is Austin Frerick, the Deputy Director of the Thurman Arnold Project at Yale, joining us today from his home in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Hi, Austin. Andrea Hazard of Hazard Free Farm in Pecatonica in Northwest Illinois couldn't join us today. She's cleaning and packing white corn to fulfill a big order that she got in at her mill. So you can order grain online from her and have it shipped right to you. We'll link to Hazard Free Farms in the chat and check out Andy's grain. Greg, I'd love to start by having you tell us a little bit about you and your farm.
Okay, there, unmuted. Good afternoon, everyone. Greg Gunthorp with Gunthorp Farms. We have a family farm in Northeast Indiana. We're about 140, 150 miles east of Chicago. We're about that same distance straight north of Indianapolis and about that same distance from Detroit. So this is kind of our region. And my family has raised pigs on pasture for at least 4 generations. Short version of our story is that my wife and I, in 1998, when the hog industry consolidated, my wife and I sold pigs for less than what my grandpa and grandma sold pigs for during the Great Depression. We netted as low as 5 cents a pound for pigs. The price in the grocery store actually went up through that same time frame. And I said that I didn't want to be the last Gunthorpe to raise pigs. And through a little bit of luck and fate, we sold our first dressed pig to a restaurant that year, Charlie Trotter in Chicago. And so in that last 22 years or so, we've developed integrated pasture, pork, and poultry operation on our farm. So we have the farm, we raise the animals. We have a USDA inspected processing plant on the farm. And then we self-distribute primarily to restaurants and institutions before Corona. But that's, you know, another story for another day. That's kind of changed some now. So.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to hear your story starts with consolidation in the hog industry, and look forward to hearing more about that from you. Austin, will you introduce yourself and your work, and would you tell us a story about how you first became interested in this issue?
Yeah, I'm Austin Ferrick. I'm from Eastern Iowa, Cedar Rapids. I am a 7th generation Iowan. I actually got introduced to concentration. I was thinking about this the other night. My dad was a beer salesman growing up, and that was honestly my introduction to concentration. Is you saw this, especially in the 90s, a lot of consolidation in the beer space, where you have that illusion of choice. You see a bunch of brands, but it's all really one company to hit different price points. You know, white yuppies prefer Blue Moon, all that kind of stuff. And then my mom ran a bakery. It was her lifelong dream. Neither of them are doing that now. My dad is a driver for ADM, and my mom kind of does a collection of oddball jobs. So that was kind of my introduction to concentration. I ended up spending my college years at a place in Iowa, actually studying slaughterhouse towns in Iowa, because my grandpa worked at a packer. Actually, both sides of my family did in Cedar Rapids, hog. But now I help run a new antitrust center out here at Yale that kind of is basically how do we really haven't enforced our antitrust laws in the last 40 years. And so a lot of it is about kind of almost finding that muscle again to regulate these markets.
I love that, finding that muscle again. I'm so glad to have you both with us to talk about the 6th of the 9 questions we asked candidates for Congress. If you're following along at home or at the office, you can view the Food and Farm Voter Guide at ilstewards.org/IWantAnswers. The farm and food sectors face unprecedented corporate consolidation. Austin, you've been on the front lines of the anti-monopoly, antitrust movement. Can you lay it out in the simplest terms for us?
Yeah.
What is corporate consolidation, and what does it look like in food and farming?
Corporate consolidation is what it means for you in your life is higher prices at the store, lower wages, or if you're a farmer, you're getting paid less. It also means less innovation, because if someone's not nipping on your heels, you're not stepping up your game. And then I actually think what these 3 things then lead to is a broken politics. Because as companies get bigger, they have more money to essentially buy off politicians. Just in Iowa, our Senate race right now is on track to cost $155 million. That's like $120 per voter. And just kind of in agriculture especially, I think the impact of this concentration means for you is food doesn't taste as good. I had the funniest conversation at a DC hotel a year or so ago where, you know, every hotel has that continental breakfast. And I got the eggs and bacon. And I just sat there and I had a bite of each of it. It was garbage. I didn't really eat it. And this guy next to me who was in from North Dakota looked at me and he had the same reaction. And we had a conversation over just how crappy CAFO bacon is. But it's kind of like a lobster in a pot. When you slowly start cutting corners, you don't realize the quality of taste, how it degrades until it's so bad. And so like you take, you know, Diamond Ranch or like just normal hog bacon, you compare it to a CAFO bacon, it truly is night and day difference. And I don't think anyone walks into a Dollar General saying, this is yummy food.
Greg, you are one of the producers of yummy food. Can you tell us what are the impacts of consolidation that you see from your perspective?
You know, the impacts of consolidation are really clear in our local communities. You know, and I come from a background in the hog industry, and I always tell people that you know, we've lost about 90% of our hog farmers in the last generation. But you can drive up and down the local roads here in LaGrange County. And one generation ago, I can tell you all the names of the farmers that, you know, we had farms all over the place, 160 to 400 acre farms. And they all either had some milk cows or some sows or both of those, and they were supporting families. And by and large, almost all of them are gone. You know, then they've been replaced by, you know, the typical grain farm now. Some of the biggest ones are 4,000 to 10,000 acres. And I don't fault any farmer for getting bigger. You know, I think that's as much a failed food farm and policy as much as it is farmers' fault. But, you know, we've by and large allowed our Department of Justice, our Federal Trade Commission, our USDA Packard and Stockyards Administration, they've all been on vacation since the 1970s. And I think it's time that they go back to work because, you know, if you look at what's really happened is that if you look at the economic metrics of rural America, you know, most farm income comes from off the farm. It's what, 90% now, I think, or somewhere along those lines. But if you look at the economic metrics of rural America, on most of them, we're worse than the inner cities. And what consolidation has really done, and I think where it hits home, is that it's taken opportunities away from farmers because it's virtually impossible to get started farming now. And I think it's took choices away from consumers because there's an awful lot of labels in the grocery store, but very few of them actually come from small local farms.
I just want to add on to Greg's point, because I actually think hogs truly are the best example of how broken it is. You have the CEO of the largest hog slaughterhouse in America making $280 million. You have the lowest percent of farm, for every dollar you spend at the grocery store, the lowest percent a farmer ever gets ever recorded. You have workers essentially not seeing a wage increase in 30 years. And then bacon was actually cheaper under President Truman than it was under President Obama. So you're just seeing all this power consolidate. And especially in hogs, I think the fact that the largest owner of hogs in America is a quasi-Chinese owned company, I think is another very big issue where even if you wanted to open your own slaughterhouse tomorrow, you couldn't even compete against Smithfield because it's been proven, by the way, like unfair trade advantages. They get subsidized loan rates from the Chinese government. And yeah, to me, hogs are the best example of how broken the food system has become and the concentration of power.
Yes, to add to that, in one generation, they went from, you know, used to be called the mortgage lifter because anybody could get into pigs, support a family, pay for a farm. And now the majority of people that own pigs don't own anything on the farm except for the mortgage on the building because they don't own the animals. They own the mortgage on the building, they own the manure, and they own the mortalities. That's all they own because they're all contract producers.
They're indentured servants. Like it's truly, I'm constantly amazed living out on the East Coast now, how most people don't realize how broken it is, how little power these people have. And I've had so many conversations where people, they know they're being abused, but you're so powerlessness to speak up that it goes unchecked.
Can you talk about that? Maybe start with Greg about this question about why are they powerless to speak up?
Why are farmers powerless to speak up?
Yeah.
You know, the farmers don't have much power in the system. We've decade after decade continued to get a lower percentage of the retail dollar. As consolidation goes on, you know, the whole argument over cheap food, and they put forth the theory that this was going to create an abundance of food. We're going to end hunger, you know, all of these things. But in the grand scheme of it, neither farmers nor consumers benefited. But farmers don't really have much of an opportunity to speak out. You know, I've got friends that have been blackballed by the Packers. You know, you don't really have that many options of where you could sell animals if you're an independent producer. And for that matter, you don't have very many options of where you can sell live animals if you're a niche producer either. So, you know, the system doesn't allow people to speak out. For that matter, you don't have many options, no options actually, to speak out if you're a contract producer. The system has allowed for virtually no competition, and without competition, you know, farmers don't have options. And so you can't burn bridges any, because there aren't very many bridges to go across.
I would compare it to the book Animal Farm that I know quite a few people read in high school, where here are these pigs, they're not happy with their lord, and so they overthrow the farm. Then you have that one pig, Napoleon, takes over and becomes what they overthrew. I mention that because to me, that's what checkoffs and Farm Bureau have become. What started off of the voice of farmers are now actually working against the interests of farmers. Take the pork checkoff. The largest owner of hogs in America is Smithfield. So they're the largest payer into the pork checkoff. At this point, you have the entity that's supposed to represent pig farmers now working the interest of a Chinese-based hog slaughterhouse based on the policies they support. That is truly horrific. And that capturing of the system to me is what has enabled a lot of this rot. Is they should have been there standing up saying, these mergers should not be happening. And there's never been a merger that Farm Bureau has said no to. And honestly, one of my favorite pieces of legislation currently pending on the Hill right now is sponsored by Utah Republican Senator Mike Lee, that is essentially make the checkoff program optional. Or at least put sunlight into this money.
Yeah, my family's paid, averaged about 40 some cents for each and every pig that we've sold since 1986 to fund a message that's completely contrary to my personal beliefs, contrary to our business interests. We've told the world that the hog industry ought to consolidate, there ought to be fewer players, that pork ought to be a white meat, that confinement is great for the environment and great for people and everything. And I've had to help fund that. Really, really annoys me.
So you've both sort of alluded to this by saying, you know, the DOJ is asleep at the wheel, but explain for viewers, how is monopoly power also become political power? Austin, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, to me, all this connects to a bigger judicial philosophy that Republicans have been pushing since the election of Reagan, that they call it the Federalist Society, but I just call it the Hack Society. How can we essentially take money from your pocket and transfer it to the robber barons? You're seeing, I mean, with corporate finance, campaign finance, they basically deregulated it. So you allow essentially people like the casino guy in Vegas can write a $25 million check. As entities get more powerful, they will then use that power to cement their power and block off competition. We're seeing it right now, most notably in our lives with Google, Facebook, Amazon, where they have the largest lobbying operations in DC, and they are just flooding the hills of flooding Capitol Hill as they try to stymie off any legislation. There's a great graph, and I can share it later on my Twitter or Facebook, but when you look at the value of Amazon, it literally is equal to every other big box store you see around the mall. You know, it's bigger if you were to add Amazon, even if you were to add Walmart, Target, Home Depot, all those stores together is equal to the power of one company basically dominated by one man. We've just never seen power this concentrated before in American history. And these people will do whatever they need to do to maintain their money. I mean, it's just a classic tale as old as time. Like that's, to me, the hope of this moment is we've been here before and we've slayed these dragons before.
Craig?
My take on it is that on this question is that we have some serious issues in this country on agency capture. And if you draw the three circles, so if you got industry, you've got trade associations and ag, and you've got the government, and you put a large percentage of the people making decisions, they're in where those three interconnect in the middle. You know, Monsanto's fell in that case lots of times where they're executives end up being the ones that write the rules. I think the most bold and horrific case that I've noticed was the Brazilian beef bribery scandal in Brazil, and the USDA Food Safety Inspection Service, so the person in charge of meat and poultry, the administrator, doesn't stop Brazilian beef. We're the only developed country in the world that didn't stop the imports of beef. And then 3 days after he retires, he takes a job with JBS. You know, those kind of conflicts of interest, we have ethics rules in this country, and we're choosing not to enforce them, you know. And so because of that, we end up with too many people that their service in government isn't for service for the people. It instead is looking for a golden parachute. And I think the other principle that we forget is that, especially in agriculture, but I think in lots of other industries, is that our government is to represent the people, not necessarily to represent production. You know, and in agriculture, you know, we have an awful lot of small farms. We have an awful lot of niche and sustainable ag. And we're increasingly becoming where we're a larger number of farmers than what the producers are, because I think 80,000 farms produce about 80% of the food now. We actually have more USDA employees in this country than what 80% of the production of farmers. But we have 2 million farmers in this in the United States, and so the government is falling short on actually representing the people, and instead is just representing bushels in production. We need to change that. Getting rid of agency capture and actually enforcing ethics laws would help drastically.
I'll add that, just add on to Greg's point, like, we need to bring shame back. People used to feel bad for selling out. Now it's just a matter of course. And I think what you can do, and I do this personally, is there's very prominent people, I don't want to say his name, but who did that. But they'll write op-eds, and they'll give a position, but they won't disclose that they're lobbyists now. I email journalists or newspapers and say, you need to disclose this. You need to say, I don't care what their formal political title was. They're a lobbyist now, and they're making $1 million working for a checkoff. Because it's shame. And we need to bring shame back to this, that you are now just a hack. Your voice, like, once you take that check, to me, your voice doesn't matter on these issues. And that's something you can do. Like, when you email an editor of a newspaper saying, hey, FYI, most of the time they will do it and they will respond, because they just don't know. I mean, they're moving a mile a minute and they're underpaid and overworked.
Can you tell us how the pandemic, the last 6 or 7 months, has shed light on and also exacerbated the problem of concentration in food and farming?
I can just, and I know Greg has more personal experience. I mean, just from what I see at my level, it just turbocharged every negative thing in American society right now of the have and have nots. I mean, I think the fact that you see all the stock market growth being concentrated into fewer and fewer hands, while many people see their future kind of slip away. I mean, to me, the scariest thing too of this moment is how much debt there is. You see truck debt, like, so many people buying trucks they really can't afford because the payments look low and they extended the terms. You have a lot of tractor debt. You have a lot of farmland. Farmland value does not make sense to me. You have student loan debt. You just have all these debt bubbles forming, and I don't know, it just reminds me of that, like, late 1970s where everyone, people get flush with cash, they live beyond their means, and you're just waiting for the bottom to fall. And to me, the scary thing is what happens at that moment. Do we have another 1985 where this consolidates even more? But Greg, how's it impacted you personally?
I'd like to share how it's impacting me personally, and then I'd like to give my perspective on how it's impacting us from a country and a global standpoint. Us personally, in lots of ways, we were way, way more fortunate than our restaurant customers. The despair I see on some of the chef owners' faces every week when making deliveries is it's rough to take. Having businesses that operated as significantly low margin businesses and then being forced to close. And then when they are allowed to open back up, only be at partial capacity. And they struggled to make ends meet when they were at full capacity. So, you know, the figure I've seen is that 11% of businesses are actually better off because of the coronavirus. I think in agriculture, I think that was the, you know, and in local food, I think that was the online retailers that were already established. You know, their sales are higher now. I think most of us in agriculture that had any products through that April and May timeframe when the big packers closed, you know, our sales went through the roof right then. But starting in June and then beyond, you know, our sales have plummeted. We ran July and August sales are the lowest 2 months that we've had as far back as our computer goes, which is 2013. So, I mean, we don't really know where our future is. You know, we've got some time to figure it out because of payroll protection program, because of those 2 months of craziness. You know, my dad keeps saying that in some ways we needed this because our society actually needed a reset. And while I agree with him 100%, I think in lots of ways, I don't think our society, partially because we aren't enforcing rules, partially because we don't have ethics laws, partially because we don't enforce concentration and consolidation laws, partially because we don't put means testing on any kind of USDA handout, so it ends up going to just a handful of the wealthiest, encourages the kind of agriculture that we as taxpayers and consumers don't really want. So, I mean, there's lots of things, but in lots of ways, you know, this could have been a good thing. You know, what we really did was the emperor has no clothes anymore. We've seen that industrial agriculture and our food supply is extremely fragile and frail. You know, anybody can acknowledge that when it's clicking, it's really, really efficient. A guy like me that raises pigs and poultry on pasture, I don't stand a chance of competing with those guys. But there's a customer base out there that likes what we do. But, you know, the little guys that don't have a direct market, they don't stand a chance of competing in this marketplace. But, you know, when that thing's not clicking, and it doesn't take very much, and we have to acknowledge we could have something significantly worse than this disruption on our food supply. The American people stand a clear chance of not having food security. And, you know, some people are talking about it, but not enough politicians are talking about it. You know, they're still just passing out money to the handful of the largest farms. You know, they're finally getting around to talk about the processing infrastructure that is very, very lacking. You know, but they're not even talking about the concentration and consolidation. We lost the lamb processor out in Colorado. JBS bought it up with the sole intentions of only processing beef there. They're going to make more money off the deal because they're the largest lamb importer in this country. They're going to make more money off the fact that they closed down the lamb slaughter than they are that they're going to process beef. That's why we have antitrust laws. If your goal to buy a business is to better your bottom line by not running it than by running the business, that's concentration and consolidation. And that's not what this country was built for. And we need to start standing up for that. And both sides of the aisle need to stand up for that. And if they're not willing to stand up for that, we need to put somebody else in place that will, because eventually we should really be concerned about food security because it's part of our national security. And we should be concerned about whether everyone from the smallest farm to large farms have opportunities in the marketplace and whether they have options in the future. And that's not really what's happening in rural America. And rural America looks like it because of it.
I would just add to that. I mean, I think the beauty of deconcentrated systems is they're resilient. And I think a really good recent example of that is Puerto Rico. Besides agriculture, healthcare is one of the most consolidated spaces, and IV solution is actually super concentrated. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but one maker has a majority share. And they did most of the production in Puerto Rico. So when that hurricane hit Puerto Rico a few years ago, it destroyed that supply chain. And then you had hospitals across America having IV solution, like a critical input, a solution on that. And we saw that we've seen this with COVID. And just add on to one more thing that concerns me about this moment is how normalized these bailout payments are getting. That we had the pandemic hit in March, yet farmers planted a record corn yield when people weren't driving cars, and most of our corn now goes to ethanol. Where's the logic there? It's very clear that that market will collapse soon as cars move to batteries. We're producing too much of a few things, and you now have soybean production occurring in Siberia. You have Brazil essentially ramping up its agricultural production. It is Trump's rhetoric, anti-China agricultural rhetoric. We're now just feeling the pain of that because China will not be dependent on us for protein. It is industrializing other sources. And I think, to me, the second these bailout payments stop, because people are now used to them, that is when things are going to get really scary.
Well, speaking of really scary, I know you both know about this, but for viewers, I think it's really important to also note that because of COVID, 59,000 workers in meatpacking companies have contracted COVID, and at least 250 have died. And it's just really important that folks know that. There's been outbreaks at over 900 facilities in 45 states, including in Illinois. And these workers were not provided adequate PPE. And frankly, a speedier response from our leaders could have prevented these large outbreaks. Last week, OSHA, the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, fined JBS, who we've been talking about. They fined JBS $15,650 for failing to protect workers at a South Dakota pork plant. JBS's revenue in the last 3 months was $629 billion. So we're talking about, like, this is, workers' lives are barely a slap on the wrist. And it just needs to be said so we recognize that the losses that have happened in the food chain in the last couple of months. A few weeks ago, in a virtual farmer roundtable meeting with Congresswoman Sherry Bustos during the congressional recess, Andrea Hazard, who couldn't be here today, but she encouraged her to take action on antitrust. Greg, you've been an outspoken leader on the need for competition and antitrust enforcement for a long time. These are really complex issues. Can you just tell us, how did you learn about these issues yourself?
Yeah, sure. I had the opportunity back when Clinton was president and Glickman was the Secretary of Agriculture to serve on the USDA Small Farm Commission. And, had already lived that experience of selling pigs for less than what my grandpa sold them for in the Depression. And, doesn't take a sane and reasonable individual very long to realize that the marketplace is probably not equitable and just, but, got introduced to some people, some farmers union, state presidents, some people from some of the land grants that were working on concentration, consolidation, Dr. Taylor, met people like Joe Maxwell that have been talking about these issues for a long time. Mike Calicrate, it's a message that resonates with me. I have a degree from Purdue University in economics. Don't claim to be an economist, but I do remember that when I was at Purdue, it talked about concentration ratios, and if the four largest companies own more than 45% of any segment of an industry, they either have monopolies or oligopolies. And in the beef industry, we have four companies that control 85%. And what that ends up on as for boots on the ground producers, the 85% of the cattle in this country are killed in 27 slaughter plants in 13 states. About 90% of the hogs are killed in 40 slaughter plants. Farmers don't have much choices, and farmers and consumers through this pandemic got screwed. I mean, there's no other way to talk about it. Farmers' prices for live animals, commodity producers, went to next to nothing if they could even sell them. At the same time, the consumers' prices went through the roof. JBS's global profit, I believe, was up like 364% in that first quarter after the pandemic. Big packers, no pun intended, made it a killing through this thing. And if we could have had 400 slaughter plants instead of 40 in hogs, we wouldn't have had the worker issues because the plants would have been smaller, and the plants that had problems would have went offline for a little bit and would have come back on when they had safe for workers, and we would not have had a major disruption in our food supply. And I'm not sitting here advocating that all of the production should be in plants as small as ours. I do believe that 7.5% of the production should be in small locker style plants. I think it's essential for the future of our rural communities. But the largest should not be in facilities that control percentages of the U.S. marketplace, because if they close, it creates messes. I mean, we've seen it. They were literally chipping pigs. They were stunning them and sticking them and taking them out to fields in Minnesota and running them through wood chippers and composting them. That wouldn't have happened if we'd have had smaller scale processing and it had been controlled by less than a handful of producers. Beef cattle finishers couldn't even sell their cattle. They euthanized laying hens. They plowed vegetables under. We don't really have a resilient food supply, and we would, just by simply introducing a few more players into the marketplace, if the Department of Justice, the Packer and Stockyards Administration, the FTC, if they quit fighting over jurisdictional issues, quit coming up with excuses, and just do their job.
Austin, why is it important for folks who support farmers like Greg and who care about local and sustainable food to understand the threat of corporate consolidation in our food system?
Yeah, I mean, do you want your money going to Greg, or do you want your money going to Beijing or Sao Paulo? To me, one of the things that gives me the most, I think, not only increasing competition, but to me, one of the best things we can do to really change these structures is school meals. Imagine if in Northeast Indiana, all the beef fed came from, or pork fed came from, Greg's farm, or farmers like Greg, instead of having, beef from the Brazilian rainforest. That's better for your local community. It's better for the climate. The food's going to taste better because it's fresher. My dream truly is for someone to go to a local community college, do a culinary program, get employed at your school district, work with extension, procure locally, make made from scratch meals. What a concept. I mean, it's not hard to do. We just need to increase the reimbursement rate. What if all the milk served in school was pasture-based instead of that, like New Mexico desert, whatever you want to call that? It's putting a green pepper in a Dollar General is not going to change things, but the purchasing power of schools will change things. Because right now, a lot of Americans' income is just stagnant, and people want to buy the better thing. You're barely getting by. It's hard to do. And so that to me is like one of my big focuses now, is really pushing that, is to use that to drive the change in the future we want to see. Because I think everyone in America has had square pizza, and there's no reason why, if a kid who lives in New England isn't eating seafood, if a kid same thing with the UP Michigan isn't eating more seafood. Like, our diets need to reflect where we live.
They could change the resiliency of our food supply drastically by just slight modifications in the purchasing programs for schools and institutions. But some of us have fought for lots of years, and there's a few cases around the country where it's improved some. But by and large, I've quit trying to sell through those programs.
I just a personal note. I mean, we know what to do here. The question is over power and the willpower. I mean, if you want to talk about monopoly, talk about Cisco. I mean, this is so trivial, but I was supposed to get married this summer. We're going to get married next year. We wanted everything served at our wedding to be from the state of Iowa. Well, the place where we're getting married at a small college in Iowa, and Cisco built their kitchen. And part of their contract is they have to buy a minimum from Cisco. So for me to get hogs from Chris Peterson, it's comical how many hoops I have to jump through. That to me right there is a very dumb, simple example of monopoly power. Why is Cisco designing the kitchen? And like, it's just, you can't. I think what I always have to remind myself is what we have now is radical. Everything we're talking about, what we want is not. We want local food. That's traditional. Having hogs owned by a foreign company, that's radical. Having small towns in Iowa with free and reduced lunch rates around 70, 80%, that's radical. The towns that grow the food can't even feed their own kids.
I want to get to what are things like this what are some solutions that we want to hear from congressional candidates. In his response to our voter guide, Senator Dick Durbin said he has called for increased vigilance from the U.S. Department of Justice and the FTC in the enforcement of antitrust laws during the pandemic, including for the agriculture and food sectors, and said he'll support exploring policies that can provide increased financial diversification, viability, and transparency for farmers and consumers. His challenger, Senate challenger Mark Curran, said he'll work on behalf of the little guy and will break up monopolies in farming and other industries. So what are some solutions that you would like to hear from congressional candidates?
Go first, Craig.
Oh, thanks. I think that's an excellent question. Joe Maxwell's group, Family Farm, I can't think of the Alliance.
Family Farm Action.
What?
Family Farm it's Family Farm Action, yeah.
Okay, yep, sorry. Family Farm Action, sorry. I think they have some great talking points on this. I think we need some stronger groups or stronger leaders within those people that get appointed by people on our side, or people that are interested in concentration and consolidation. I think we have one in the Federal Trade Commission out of 5. I'd like to see us have 3 out of 5. We lost a lot of ground in the Packer and Stockyards administration, this last administration, because they buried it down in ag marketing service. So I'd like to see, some reforms in the Packer and Stockyards administration. I'd like to see a clear delineation between the Department of Justice and the Packer and Stockyards administration on who actually is responsible for these, because in lots of ways, the Packer and Stockyards Act actually kind of gives both of them an out, in that the Department of Justice says, oh, well, it's our responsibility unless the agency has a specific law for it. And so they say the Packer and Stockyards, and the Packer and Stockyards administration says, oh, this is not our responsibility, because the overlying issues are the Department of Justice's issues. So I'd love to have a politician that would force them to set themselves down and actually write out some memorandums to clear up some of that. The initial rules on like the quantity of cattle that have to be in the open market is a good start. I think the hog industry is too far. Less than 2% of the hogs in the United States are sold on the spot market. I don't even think it's a market anymore. So it's going to take a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm at the point now, right? Like, they can say the right thing. You need to do. Like, there is just so much hollow talk in the last umpteen years. I mean, most famously the 2010 hearings by DOJ and USDA. For me, just a very simple thing right now, just co-sign this legislation. You have the moratorium on mergers, and then you have basically kind of this beautiful bill that phases out confined animal feed operations, inserts country of origin labeling, and adds some pro-competition rules in GIPSA. And or that checkoff reform bill. It's signing on to those 3 pieces of legislation. Anything less than that to me is just empty words. especially with some of the delegation in Illinois, where you're in safe seats, or you're not going to deal with Farm Bureau coming after you in suburban Chicago. I think those are the perfect seats for those members to sign on.
For folks at home, we just named a bunch of potential solutions. You can find those in the chat. There's the Alliance joined 40 organizations in providing the Biden and Trump campaigns with our priorities for addressing livestock market competition. And so you can read the list there, which includes many that Greg and Austin mentioned. We're putting the finishing touches on the voter guide webpage now. We know you're eager to hear more of candidates' responses, like Senator Durbin. You can sign up to be the first to know. Visit ilstewards.org/I-want-answers, scroll to the bottom for the form that says get notified, and we'll send you a copy. So fellas, organizing around these issues is really hard work. What gives you hope? Greg?
I think what gives me hope and what gets me up in the morning and keeps me doing what we're doing is the, I think having a rural America that I want for my grandkids to live in, that's what gives me hope. And I think as this pandemic came through, I think the other thing that gives me hope is that when I talk to individuals now, you rarely, if ever, get anyone that isn't on board and doesn't realize, just 8 months ago, you'd have told people that the big cities only have 72 hours worth of food, and we actually have a really, really fragile food supply. And while it's really, really efficient, it's not really, really cheap food. It's cheap ingredients. It left the farm at a low, low price. Processors and retailers took a much bigger share of that. That was a lot harder to explain than it is now. And I think people connect on that a lot better. So I think it gives me hope in that our conversations are a lot easier now, but the task at hand is still as monumental and still as difficult.
Yeah, I guess a few things. For me, I truly love this using school meals as a vehicle for positive change, just because, first of all, it is positive. You're talking about what a deconcentrated, localized supply chain could be and revitalizing rural areas. Like, I think right now our culture is so dark, offering a positive vision really connects with people. And it's also we're not just focusing on the people that grow up, we're also focusing on the people that, transport it, cook it, process it. And when you're talking about that, you're talking about 1 in 10, 1 in 11 Americans. On a personal note, we just announced last week we're hosting a big ag and antitrust conference at Yale Law School this January. So if you know anyone interested, we would please, we'll post the link shortly, have them submit a paper. You're seeing a lot of interest in younger students just because you have this collection of students who really care about labor, students who really care about the climate, students who come from rural areas and they know how broken it is. It's kind of the sad thing of American history where it's like that Winston Churchill quote where Americans do everything. But I forget the quote. Like, I'm not sure the exact phrase, but basically things have to break for us to do the right thing. And I think we're clearly in a moment like that. Just on a final personal note, I always tell people this because in Illinois, don't trust what the Illinois Farm Bureau says. That's like trusting the Chamber of Commerce to speak for small businesses. When the Illinois Farm Bureau speaks, they're speaking for Cargill, for Monsanto. They're not speaking for the type of farmers or the type of communities where we envision. They care more about Monsanto selling more seeds. They don't care about the livelihood of farmers.
Austin, we're really excited about school lunches too, but also like hospitals and airports like O'Hare Airport and park districts in Chicago. So the Alliance, we're organizing with partners, including the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, to pass the first ever statewide good food purchasing policy. And in the comments, you should see a link to learn more about the GFPP.
Wonderful. And one quick thing on that. This is something New York does. I think it's just absolutely incredible, and I hope more states adopt. I think it's called Fresh New York, Eat New York. Let me think about the word, but basically they've opened these stores around the state, and rest stops where it's only New York grown food. They're run by extension. And so you walk in and you will see, you know, I mean, it might be local yogurt, it might be jerky. I think I've been to there's 12 of them, or we've been quite a few. It's basically a way for a lot of local farmers market vendors to also have a stall. Because most rest stops in America, it's like a shitty, you know, it's, sorry, I watch my language. Really crappy fast food that's like Burger King that's like $12 for a meal, or you can buy something made by someone within the state. And I think using those type of vehicles, I just think it's fun. I just think people enjoy it. They like the idea of, because even when you go to Whole Foods, and we all know most of the time at this point, Whole Foods, it's the premium product line of the conglomerates. A lot of the independent brands have been bought out. And so most of the stuff you buy, it's hard to even find local things in a lot of the Whole Foods. And so having a space that here is a state agency that is selling state products, I just think it's so cool. And I just imagine all the rest stops around Illinois having a bunch of downstate Illinois products, you know, featuring those. And it's a way, I know for us personally, we've been exposed to companies, small businesses that we then went and bought on our own because we love the product so much.
Well, we're running short on time, but I have this last important question for you guys, starting with Greg. Why is it important to be a food and farm voter?
You know, it ends up being about the kind of farms and the kind of rural America that we want, but it's much broader than that. You know, it ends up being about the not just the farmer, but the animals, the land, the environment. There's a definite connection to consumer health. You know, we look at food policy. If you flip the food pyramid upside down, you basically have the food subsidy pyramid. We as taxpayers have no problem allowing the government to support the exact opposite things that we know we should eat. And so this is a holistic approach to solving a large portion of the issues, all the way from at the micro level where we can't see, all the way to the macro level of the economics of rural America and our society. It's just the right thing to do to know your farmer, know where your food's coming from, and then also know your politician and know that they're standing up for an opportunity for everyone.
Yeah, I would just, quick little clarification. It's called Taste New York, if anyone's interested in learning more. Kind of what I love about this too is it's truly bipartisan. It brings together a truly unique coalition where you talk about local food procurement, you know, having all beef in Illinois come from Illinois beef farmers. That's something that my grandpa, who's a Trump supporter, loves and will vote for, in the same way that, you know, North Chicago suburbanite will vote and support. Food reflects who we are. And I think right now it doesn't reflect that great on us. And using that as a vehicle for a lot of positive changes to make our, you know, to improve labor, like take meatpacking. There's nothing inherently, like meatpacking was a lower wage job in the jungle. We saw that and we said, these people deserve better. So we made it middle class. We made a conscious decision to elevate this profession because nothing is inherently middle class. That is a choice we make as a society. And then what we've seen in the last umpteen years is reverse back down to that jungle. So there's no reason why people who work in food, instead of having this bifurcated society of have and have nots, we don't elevate those positions of putting respect back to it, where take school meals. There's been, I mean, this shouldn't be shocking to anyone. Turns out when people do meals from scratch versus frozen square pizza, they enjoy their job more. It's dignity. It's respecting these professions, I think. And it's a good way to even teach culture. I mean, there's a way that kids can learn about, oh, there's a lot of El Salvadorian kids. Let's have some El Salvadorian food in the school system. That's what, to me, is why people should focus on it. It's just, it captures so much about our society and what we value.
Thank you both so much for being here today. What a great conversation. And to everyone following along at home during your lunch hour, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you can come back next week. We're going to, for the same time and same place, we're going to talk about reducing agricultural runoff and water quality with a great lineup of farmers and experts who are using soil health practices to prevent erosion and pollution to our drinking water. Something I know Greg knows a lot about, raising hogs on pasture. We're putting the final, as I mentioned, we're putting the final touches on the voter guide. We'll get it to you as soon as we can. If you want your copy, go to ilstewards.org/I1answers and sign up on the form. I want to remind you that at the Alliance, this work is powered by members. You can become a member of Illinois Stewardship Alliance at ilstewards.org/join. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks, Austin. Thanks, Greg. And we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.